modernism in literature was actually influenced by the subjective turn of the impressionist and post-impressionist art, as I said, in the exhibition which came out. Now, what is impressionism? If in a very short, in a very simple way, one should say that impressionist paintings were starting to look at through the lens, a subjective lens of the individual, instead of looking at so there are impressionists the beginning at the beginning, you know, Manet and Monet and Morisot and others. They started with these paintings of very simple things like a haystack, or the pond lilies in the pond, or something, you know, and in the daytime ones and in the evening ones. So through different lights, through different moods, they were trying to look at the same object at different points of time, and through different moods and through different perception of the artist. Sorry. So there was also a new kind of style that was used in impressionists, where there was very loose brush strokes and you know, very bright colors and so on. So in a way, it was also, you know, through whether the form or the content, it was very different from the earlier kind of paintings that one had seen. It posed a challenge, therefore, to the modernist novels. Also tried to experiment, uh, being influenced by these post-impressionists and impressionist painters. And so it posed a challenge to realism of 19th century by looking through the works of James Joyce, Woolf, Lawrence, Richardson, and others. Let's look at how modernism was actually was trying to depict a different kind of reality. What is that reality? Psychological reality, reality representing the consciousness, representing perception, emotion, thought processes, and through interior monologue, through stream of consciousness, through tunneling process, through defamiliarization techniques, and so on. Now, let's look at one or two of them. Stream of consciousness, for instance. What is this novel? Change its aim of depicting material truth through realism, and it sought to depict psychological reality, as I said, and was trying to also look into the mind, mental, and the character's soul in the present moment. And William James, in Principles of Psychology, for the first time describes this new way of representing reality by saying that conscious experience is continuous and unbroken, like a stream. The stream of consciousness, therefore, refers to the never ending associative flow of conscious or semi conscious thoughts, perceptions, and feelings. So, thoughts processes are just like a stream flowing. Sometimes we are conscious of the different thoughts in our mind, sometimes we are not. Sometimes we are semi conscious, sometimes it is from one thought to the other, it is an associative flow. And sometimes we are unable to break, you know, unless and until we are very conscious, we cannot actually stop this flow of consciousness. And that is why it is called stream of consciousness. And it was used by James. Edward Dujardin first used this technique in a French novel in 1887. And this novel, for the first time, attempted to capture moment by moment experience. Usually, in a novel, we have seen in a realist novel, most of them have been either Bildungsroman narrative, where the life of the protagonist from early childhood to maturity, and you move from major events, you know, you move the narrative moves from one major event to the next. In a way, there is the so-called ordinary life or ordinary day, those are not depicted, or moment by moment, you know, thing is not depicted. Instead, we only focus on the artist would only focus on the important events in the lives of the protagonist, or important events in the lives of the characters. And so Dujardin was first capturing moment by moment experience of a young law student over the course of 6 hours only on an April evening in Paris. According to James Joyce, the reader was placed inside the thought processes of the main character. And it was as if as George Moore would put it, that the daily life of the soul is unveiled for the first time, and a kind of symphony in full stops and commas. In fact, there is a lot of writing now on how modernism, modern novels especially, is also talking about the ordinariness of life. The ordinariness of life. Virginia Woolf uses a term where she talks about the cotton wool of life. So, in a way, this ordinariness of the life is very important. The moment by moment, mental, emotional, mental framework or emotions and thought processes and so on are being captured rather than major events in the life of the person. In England, Dorothy Richardson came out after Dujardin's experimentative novel. Dorothy Richardson came out with her pioneering multi-volume. It has 12 volumes novel, which is semi-autobiographical to some extent. It's called The Pilgrimage, and it was an experiment in this stream of consciousness stream of consciousness technique, which captured the immediacy of subjective experience by focusing on the consciousness of one person, that is focusing on the consciousness uh, of only Miriam, sorry. Richardson actually plays with the language to evoke emotions and sensations. However, because the novel is only seen through one person's mental process, so it lacks depth in some ways, and it fails to have layers of experience. It only talks about Miriam's consciousness. It doesn't even talk about Miriam's semi conscious thoughts or semi-conscious perceptions. And so in some ways, Richardson's novel, although was had provided also a feminine perspective to the Miriam's consciousness, Richardson was able to conceive of a new woman in Miriam, who was independent, who lived and smoked and stayed in a rented flat, but still, in order to earn her livelihood, she had to take up a very traditional job of a governess, a children's governess. So the new woman was is seen to be in this very complex figure who is trying to undermine traditional sexual roles, but at the same time they are still caught within the social patriarchal setup. So critics of Richardson therefore viewed Richardson as a very iconoclastic and anarchic figure. However, the novel's technique, the stream of consciousness technique, has not been, although it was new, but it has not been received as something extremely well written, because of the lack of depth in the narrative and point of view, also lack of point of views. Next came James Joyce, who was inspired by Dujardin and wrote Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, which uses free indirect discourse. And there is a lyrical intensity, there is a kind of associated with the thoughts, associated with individual experience. And a small example has been given. It starts with, once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road, and this moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nice little boy named Baby Taku. Now you can see that for Joyce, impression was constituted by language, where this is the novel is following the mental thought process of a young boy, and therefore it speaks from the young boy's perspective, and so in accordance with an infant kind of idiom is being used. So it was also a parody of and pastiche of various literary and cultural styles which have been used earlier. His novel Ulysses, which is of course his grand work, which came out in 1922, uses a mythical structure which whereby he is using Homer's Odyssey, and he uses intertextuality. He uses the thoughts and perceptions of Stephen Dedalus and Leopold Bloom through One Day in Dublin. which corresponded to the adventures of Ulysses in on his return from the Battle of Troy. So while in Ulysses, Battle of Troy, it's an epic and it covers a longer period. This is actually the thoughts and perception of Stephen Dedalus and Leopold Bloom happens over a shorter period, and Joyce is therefore asserting a kind of a new realism which challenges this objective material reality in order to reveal the subjective perception, the subjective experience of life. And he emphasizes the deeper unruly forces of the subconscious self, and that is more important in terms of Joyce's experiments. Next comes Virginia Woolf. We've already talked a little bit about her. Virginia Woolf, in her novels Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, Orlando, and the Waves, uh, has captured the intense moments for the revelation of identity. And she calls it moments of being. A certain moment where one seems to have certain kind of, all of a sudden, a perception, a maturity in understanding. Woolf, in her review of Joyce's Ulysses, however, argues that Joyce's subjective impressionism aims to record the movement of the mind unmediated by the artistic selection or form. But she felt that the novel concentrated only on the individual mind and refused to acknowledge the interaction between the consciousness and the world around it. And therefore, in her novels, she tries to present the thoughts processes of not just one protagonist, but actually various individuals, and how these in some ways they connect with each other, and so individual minds but which also interconnect in some ways. And she explores therefore the permeability of the self, which Joyce and Richardson have not been able to do. uh, yeah. uh, a last example would be an example by a novel by Rose Macule, and it's called The Crew Train. Came out in 1926, and it's very very interesting the way in which it has been taken to a different extreme altogether, where similar to Ulysses to some extent, but also very different because it works on associative principle. We were talking about the flow of stream of thought, which is associative. So it's the same way, it is associating one word with the next, and different images come out, different word associative words come out. A woodpecker, that's a woodpecker because the woodpecker would peck her. Why did the lobster blush? Because it saw the salad dressing. No, because the table had seen her legs. Can't remember the questions, only the answers. Answers. Tidbits. Pinkham. John Bull. Other island. Shaw. Getting married. Why get married? Ring. Wedding dress. Mendelssohn. Bridesmaid. Babies. Is marriage worthwhile? Does one survive death? My religion, all the novelist, is marriage worthwhile? Love, dove, shove, glove, glove. Oh, my love, I love you so much, it hurts. Yes, marriage is worthwhile. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes, all around the town. You can see in some way it seems to be completely, completely meaningless, completely irrational, but it kind of shows the flow, the impulse, the meaningless impulse, and the irrational kind of ways in which our thought processes work, sometimes only with the help of associative principle, right? So the stream of consciousness has been criticized in by others. It has been seen to be uh, very elitist and only talking about the mind without taking into consideration social and political realities and so on. But Virginia Woolf, this is something where she focuses more on the ordinary mind on an ordinary day. This is from Modern Fiction, the essay that she has written, where very famous lines where she says, examine for a moment an ordinary mind on an ordinary day. The mind receives myriad impressions, trivial, fantastic, evanescent, and as they fall, they shape themselves into the life of Monday or Tuesday. So here is what I was trying to tell you. that it's not important, in fact she goes on to say that it need not be any plot, any comedy, any tragedy. So in a way she's talking about how the important events are not the only events which are worthwhile or which are worth talking about. It's the ordinary everyday experience and the everyday emotions which are important, and those need to be also uh, written about, or expressed in some ways. A backlash happened against the subjective and formal and linguistic experimentation because, of course, it is, as you can see, a very self conscious artistry is involved here in the way in which Rose Maculae writes, or even Woolf or Joyce. There is a self conscious artistry which has been criticized by many critics. F.R. Lewis, for instance, in Scrutiny, talks about how the great tradition, the book where he talks about how Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Joseph Conrad are the major proponents of modern novels, and does not take into consideration Woolf or others. Till Conrad he is ready to accept, but not after that. So. So he is the one. Q.D. Lewis also argued that Woolf is a social elitist, and they're only talking about elite group of people, upper class, and who are secluded from the real life, social life, political life, from the war, from the crisis of the time. So this criticism has often been aimed at other great artists like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and others also, because they are supposed to be extremely elitist in their ways of expressing. That is often Lawrence, of course, is still not, because Lawrence does write about colliery novels and so on, but the others have been very often criticized for being very elitist and heterosexual and upper class male. Woolf is, of course, not heterosexual, but yeah.